Let's talk about something pretty incredible. It's a story about a 700-year-old prophecy that connects two men, a panicked king and a humble carpenter. They're both from the exact same royal line, the House of David, and they both get faced with a totally impossible crisis. Both of them are given a divine sign, a way out. One of them says no, and the other says yes. You know what? That single choice, that one difference, it changes absolutely everything. So let's dive in. So here's the whole story in a nutshell. On one side, you've got King Ahaz. He's ruling Jerusalem around 735 BC, and he is staring down the total collapse of his entire nation. Then you flash forward 7 centuries, now you've got Joseph, a carpenter in Nazareth, and he's facing this deeply personal crisis that's threatening his whole future, his reputation, everything. Both of them are heirs of David, both get a direct message from God, and they make completely opposite choices. I mean, their stories are just a perfect mirror image of faith versus fear. All right, so let's start with the king. To really get why he made the choice he did, you have to understand the kind of pressure he was under. I mean, we're talking about a young guy, just 20 years old, who has barely been crowned king, and immediately the world just starts closing in on him. So Ahaz is trapped in this geopolitical nightmare. You've got the Assyrian Empire, which is the superpower that's basically on a rampage across the region. So in a pretty desperate move, Syria and Samaria, they team up to fight back, and they demand that Ahaz join their rebellion. He says no. So what's their response? They surround his capital, Jerusalem, and they plan to kill him and put their own guy on the throne. Ahaz is completely and totally cornered, with no good options in sight. And in this absolute panic, Ahaz, he just completely loses his faith. He ignores the advice from the prophet Isaiah, and he starts hedging his bets, right? He turns to idol worship. And then the Bible records the most horrific act imaginable. He sacrifices his own son, his heir, to a pagan god, hoping it's going to save his kingdom. Fear drove him to abandon literally everything he was supposed to stand for. And this was Isaiah's core message to the king. It was a direct plea. He was basically saying, look, the only thing that will keep your kingdom standing is your faith in God's promise to the house of David. Trust that, and you will survive. Trust anything else, and you are finished. But Ahaz, he just couldn't hear it over the sound of his own fear. So, God makes him a direct offer through Isaiah. He says, ask for a sign, any sign you want, to prove I'm with you. And this is Ahaz's reply. I mean, it sounds pious, doesn't it? Oh, I won't test the Lord. But the source material, it calls this abominably hypocritical. And why? Because Ahaz had already made his decision. He was going to go appeal to Assyria for military help, a political solution, not a divine one. He was just putting on a religious show. But here's the really crucial part. God's plan doesn't depend on one faithless king. In fact, Ahaz's failure to trust becomes the perfect backdrop for one of the most famous prophecies ever given. Because Ahaz wouldn't ask for a sign, God gives one anyway. He says the sign will be a child born to a young woman in the royal court, and his name is going to be Emmanuel. And that name is the whole point. It literally means God is with us. It's a direct answer to the king's unspoken belief that God had totally abandoned him. So you have to understand, in its original context, back in 735 BC, this prophecy was an immediate reassurance. It meant that even though Ahaz had sacrificed his own heir and had broken faith, God was going to provide another heir. The royal line of David would not be broken. See? God's faithfulness would overcome human failure. Okay, now let's fast forward 700 years. The promise to David's line is still alive, but now it's fallen to a simple carpenter from Nazareth named Joseph. And just like his royal ancestor, he's about to face his own impossible test of faith. Now, Joseph's crisis isn't some invading army. It's deeply, deeply personal. He discovers that Mary, the woman he's legally bound to marry, is pregnant, and he knows for a fact that he is not the father. Now, the Gospel of Matthew describes him as a just man, which is really important. It means this wasn't just a social problem for him, it was a profound crisis of his faith and of the law. So what does it actually mean that Joseph was a just man? Well, it's not about being morally perfect. It starts with having a pure heart. Think of it like a chemical, right? Purity means it's not mixed with anything else. A pure heart has an unmixed loyalty.
It's focused on God and God alone, totally unlike Ahaz, whose heart was just divided by fear. And that brings us to this idea of innocent hands, which is a direct contrast with King Ahaz. Innocent hands are hands that have not offered sacrifices to false gods. I mean, remember Ahaz in his panic sacrificing his own son? Joseph is the complete opposite. His hands are clean because his faith is pure. And finally, there's this beautiful Hebrew expression about not lifting one's soul to idols, which basically just means not praying to them. A just man, someone like Joseph, directs his entire being, all of his trust, toward the one true God. He is the polar opposite of Ahaz, and that right there is the key to his whole story. So just like Ahaz, Joseph gets a divine sign, a message from an angel in a dream. And notice the very first words the angel says after his name: do not be afraid. The angel addresses the exact same emotion, that exact same fear that destroyed King Ahaz. But this time, this descendant of David is going to make a different choice. And right here, the gospel writer, Matthew, he makes the connection absolutely explicit. He literally stops the story and tells his readers, hey, pay attention. What is happening right now with this carpenter? This is the ultimate fulfillment of that 700-year-old prophecy given to a faithless king. Now, Matthew quotes Isaiah, but there's a really fascinating detail in the translation here. The original Hebrew word that Isaiah used, Alma, it just meant a young woman. Simple enough. But Matthew was writing in Greek, and he used the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which chose the word parthenos. By that time, centuries later, that word specifically meant virgin, and the prophecy was already understood to be pointing toward a unique, miraculous birth for the Messiah. Kind of cool, right? So, the crucial point is this. When he was presented with a divine sign that completely defied logic, Joseph did what Ahaz would not. He believed. He said yes. He took Mary as his wife, he adopted her son, and he gave that son a place in the line of David. His quiet, simple act of faith was the key that unlocked the fulfillment of God's ancient promise. And that brings us to our final section, where we get to see how this entire centuries-long story comes together in the meaning of two simple names. So this presents a little bit of a puzzle, right? The angel tells Joseph, you are to name him Jesus. But the prophecy that Matthew just quoted says his name will be Emmanuel. So which one is it? Are they different, or are they somehow connected? Well, let's just look at what they mean. The name Jesus, or Yeshua in Hebrew, it means the Lord saves. And the name Emmanuel, like we learned, means God with us. So one is an action, the other is a state of being. And this is the brilliant conclusion that Matthew has been building toward this whole time. The two names aren't in conflict at all. They actually explain each other. The child's name is Jesus, because his entire purpose is salvation. But what is salvation? Well, according to Matthew, it's the profound, lived experience of Emmanuel, of knowing without a single doubt that God is with us. The action of Jesus reveals the reality of Emmanuel. And that is exactly why Matthew ends his entire gospel with these words from Jesus. The story that began with a prophecy of God with us to a fearful king and was only made possible by a faithful carpenter concludes with the ultimate promise of Emmanuel, a constant presence forever. It's just a powerful reminder that faith isn't about the absence of crisis, but about the presence of God right in the middle of it.